Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Danche Organic Wash Processed Ethiopia from Fuglen Coffee. And there's the cup right there. And yes, it did spill everywhere. I am not the biggest fan of their cups. But Fuglen, originally based out of Oslo, Norway. However, I'm at a park near their Taito City location here in Tokyo, Japan, and back to being interrupted by ambulances and helicopters, so apologies for any sort of background noise. But Fuglen is a coffee roaster that has appeared on this channel multiple times before during our Cafe Box Advent Calendar series last year. So they are one of the coffee roasters here in Tokyo that I do have a bit more familiarity with, so I definitely wanted to swing by one of their shops and try their coffee for myself. Now, the notes on the shop itself, it is one of the few coffee shops I've been to that's actually had a batch brew drip offering. So that's what this coffee is. It's one of the few that we've actually reviewed that is a batch brew drip coffee. Other than that, just like a lot of the other coffee shops, they do have every single one of their current offerings available as a hand brew. So that's an option for anybody that might be interested in some of their other coffees, but I really wanted to try one of the drip coffees during this trip, and this might be one of the few opportunities I got. So I'm looking forward to discussing that aspect of it. In addition to that, the coffee shop is quite different from a lot of the other coffee shops we've visited, as the majority of the coffee shops we've reviewed up to this point have a very modern theme to them, whereas this one actually feels a little bit more like an old school coffee shop in general. And once again, I would love to include some video, but I'm not going to be recording video inside of any of these coffee shops. But this one was just a notably different approach to the actual interior of the shop relative to some of the other ones. Now, as far as the roast profile for this one goes, our previous experiences with Fuglen's coffees have been on the more developed side of things, especially relative to the other Nordic roasters featured in that advent calendar. This one doesn't feel quite as developed as that one did. It's not necessarily quite as light as a majority of the coffees that we've reviewed up to this point, but even then, it's not pushing the spectrum as much as we had experienced from them in the past. So it's still maybe a little bit more on the slightly developed side of that light medium by most standards and metrics, but that's kind of the best way I can identify this coffee. Now, the actual descriptor of this coffee itself, so for me, it offered a lot of dark themed and darker attributes to it. So that's most specifically thinking in terms of the fruit components, but also plenty of a savory tea aspect. There's one thing I do have to say about this coffee is that it really does seem to lean into and heavily focus on those savory tea characteristics to it, something that will be demonstrated in the tasting wheel. But in addition to that, the other profiles in this coffee were also on the darker side of things. Darker stone fruits, darker berry fruits. Those were probably the most pronounced and dominant aspects for me, at least in terms of the fruit side of things. Still plenty of sweetness and even a nice little bit of a caramelized component to it as well. So that's continued to be a theme with these coffees we've reviewed in Japan. So let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And let me go ahead and pull up my notes right here. So we have a lot of level 4s, and we'll start with the cleanliness level 4. Yes, and that's the first big indication that this coffee isn't necessarily marred by an overly developed profile. As I've kind of mentioned in the past, that did seem to hinder some of the previous experiences we've had with their coffees. So that right there being at that level 4 is a nice little start for this one. Finish, level 4. Yes, I do have to say that it's maybe not quite as long-lasting of a finish as some of the other coffees. That's been another interesting theme about this series, is that we've had some really long-lasting coffees. This one right here, it does leave a little bit of that savory tea-like aspect in the finish in a somewhat long manner, but not necessarily to the extent as some of the other coffees we've reviewed. Sweetness, level 4. Yes, this is really nice sweetness, especially for a wash-processed Ethiopian coffee. Plenty of vibrancy in general right from the start, so credits to them in that sense. I really appreciate that about this coffee. Acidity, level 4. Yes, and that's another thing that I was kind of surprised by, was that there was an abundance of brightness within this coffee, especially for it being a drip washed Ethiopian coffee. I think they did a nice job of offering some really nice bright and acidic aspects within this coffee, so credit to them in that sense. Berry fruit, level 4. Yes, and that's one of the early things I mentioned. I do believe they had something along the lines of a grape note listed on here. Once again, I can see that the coffees I've had today have been a little bit more on the grapey side of things, a little bit more, I'll just say strong and vibrant in that sense. Citrus fruit, level 4. Yes, and I believe one of the notes that they have listed on here is a citrus fruit. It's one that I don't have any familiarity with, but I can feel a fair bit of citrus, and it just also feels like a slightly darker citric attribute to this one. Stone fruit, level 4. Yes, especially right at first, this one did seem to offer a fair bit of those darker plum-like attributes to it, and that was quite pronounced and notable in abundance. If anything, I do have to say it's probably the least pronounced and, yeah, just least pronounced of the fruit profiles within this coffee. So level 4 still seems fitting, even if it is on the slightly lower side of level 4. Savoriness, level 4. Yes, as I've kind of mentioned, the savory tea aspects of this coffee are by far the most pronounced characteristic for me in it. It's present right at the start, and it continues to present itself throughout the duration of this coffee. So I feel like that one definitely justifies the level 4, one of the most, if not the most savory coffees we've had on here. And then I'm kind of thinking about it. It also seems to go in line with the berry attributes of it, as I can also see some darker, more tart berry aspects present within this one, as it does offer more than just a one-dimensional washed Ethiopian profile. It seemed to offer plenty of like floral, fruity, as well as savory aspects to it. A lot of tea-like characteristics in general, with a robust and vibrant flavor profile. So as I am looking at this tasting wheel, I do think it is a good representation of what I got from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. It was actually a little better than I was expecting, and I've kind of alluded to my previous experiences with this coffee roaster as not having been the best. So I think they did a nice job with this coffee. I'm not entirely sure what it is or why it's so drastically different from those previous experiences, but it seems to be a little bit more in line with my experiences here in Japan, which as a whole has been pretty positive. So this one right here, it's got vibrancy for a washed Ethiopian coffee. At least it wasn't a tame, boring washed Ethiopian coffee. I think that's kind of the best thing I can say about this one, because I say I don't like reviewing washed Ethiopian coffees. You have to do something special, spectacular, out of the ordinary. And this one right here, just exceeding my expectations ever so slightly, is at least a step in the right direction. So it'll be interesting to try some more coffees from them in the future. I'm sure I'll have the opportunity to do so. And this one right here, at least, is a nice little gateway towards the next one. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to. I really want to focus on the savory aspects. That's one of the big sticking points for me, is this one offered so many savory tea-like aspects. And while I'm mentioning that, I should say that on the tasting wheel, the body scored a level 1, and this was an extremely light-bodied cup of coffee, especially for it being brewed by the... Sorry, getting interrupted by quite a few things at this time, especially given that it was batch brewed. This was a very light-bodied cup of coffee, and one more thing I wanted to allude to. So those things with a darker profile in general, that's kind of the best direction I can point somebody towards for this one. And abundance of different fruit profiles as well, so you're getting a little bit of depth as well. Not a necessarily overly boring, but not necessarily an overly exciting Ethiopian coffee in general. I think that's the best way I can leave this review before more things start happening. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee or anything else from Fuglen, I'd love to know your thoughts or impressions of it, or them as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Danche Organic Wash Processed Ethiopia from Fuglen Coffee. Thank you for watching.